Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Community Bites with Canada Community of Practice here. We have several chapters in Canada Community of Practice from Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, Atlantic provinces, and we have a lot of people joining in from these areas. Before we start this conversation, I'll briefly talk about what we do. So, in these many chapters, we have three strategic objectives: building the community of practice of DevOps and beyond. And that's where we are taking this discussion to data ops today, engaging in the ecosystem on increasing the brand awareness, and crowdsourcing adoption of DevOps practices and beyond, where we use this crowdsource and chat channel to bring difficult topics on the table. From where we are today, we have some enabler themes, and in February, we are talking about data SecOps. So it would lead us into right away into the topic today, securing democratized data. We will initiate this conversation through the crowd chat forum. So if you are not logged in into the crowd chat, I'll highly encourage you all to go there and put up your views on the first question, that what does democratization of data mean? I hope that responses are coming in. So let's quickly dive into this topic. Do you see anything coming in, Sriram, on the crowd chat?
Yeah, here, Garima. I'm just posting it. The first question now on the crowd chat. Yeah.
There we go.
Right. So the first question itself is a very difficult one. Democratization of data, enabling digital democracy in my mind. But Gautam, I will start with you. I think you are one of the SMEs and subject matter expert here for us. So why don't you initiate this conversation for us?
Sure. I personally feel that this topic of data democratization is so important today because we're living in a hyper dynamic, remote workforce oriented environment. And so speed to value is extremely essential, and this requires data to be available to as many people as possible, and not just by gatekeepers or certain sets of people within the workforce, like IT or just the data scientists. So for me, and this is an enterprise view of things, I believe that data democratization is this ongoing process of enabling people within the organization, irrespective of their technical background or their know-how, and allowing them to work with the right data that they need to work with comfortably, to feel confident working with the data, and enable themselves to take this data-driven decision-making in order to build these customer experiences that are powered by data. That's what I would consider democratized data for me.
Excellent. And if you can put some points on the crowd chat, that would be great. William, I would ask you some questions on data democratization. You come from that background, right? You have been actively working with some set of people who actually work in this dimension, not from an organization perspective, but from a very larger context, from a country perspective, from a city perspective. How do you see data democratization and enabling data digital democracy through data democratization would help?
Yes, that's a good question. And I am working in an environment where this is a very important question as well. Working for a government which is providing statistics to the people of the country, to the businesses of the country, and trying to make it accessible and actually useful. And there are a couple of things which are hurdles which can get in the way, such as personal identifiers can get in the way. There can be technical hurdles which get in the way, and there can be just administrative hurdles because the data just doesn't become available to you in a useful way. So there are many of these aspects which we are trying to address as an institution to be able to democratize data and make it more accessible.
Right. I will come back to you, William. If you can actually put your thoughts on the chat, that would be great. I would now ask Ashutosh. I think you come from a technology perspective here, and I think from a technology perspective, we are very curious to understand with the 2 billion users, maybe approximately more than that, in on Facebook kinds of platform. How do you see that technology is enabling democratization of data, and what it means for technologists?
Well, it's a very good question, and I would also like to add that technology is actually generating a lot of data as well. So being consumer of the data, it is also generating a lot of data which is available on a lot of forums online, and being able to use that to provide services. Well, in both cases, in good way or bad way, but I think making data open, being available, making it available to a lot of people around the world is something which is of prime importance now in this age where I think most of the people, whether being in a class one cities or in rural areas, have access to a lot of great technologies. So I believe it's important that we make it an enabler. Well, data is an enabler, but again, with the amount of data getting generated by technology and then by getting consumed by technology is something which is really important nowadays. I think one of the great examples is the one which is recently launched, where we're seeing metaverse, which is again consuming of a lot of data and then creating of a lot of data. So it's something which is being used in every field now.
Right. And from economies where we are seeing emerging technology interception at this stage, I would invite contributions from Munaf, who's actually working with us from an Atlantic province chapter leader. He is leading that chapter from a different dimension altogether, where we are seeing a lot of technology onboarding to different kind of industry segmentations. So if you want to add, Munaf, something to this conversation, that would be great. I also invite Momba Chimo, who is joining us from our Africa community. If you have something to say on data democratization, what is happening in your region, your area, that would be a great, conversation to kind of kickstart.
Okay, thanks for this opportunity. So I think my name is Mboma, but you can just say Oma if it's like too difficult to pronounce. So data democratization simply means when there are a lot more people who can have access to information, basically. And I think here in Africa, people are actually like putting in efforts to ensure that even those who are just getting into the technology space have access to learning materials, learning resources. So it's more like nothing is hidden, everything is like brought into the open, and people are encouraged to always share articles, share resources that contain like information that everybody needs to have. Thank you.
That's a great point, actually. Data democratization in one way also uncovers opportunities which is beyond technologists and beyond decision makers. It gives the power to the people. And that actually initiates some other questions on board with data democratization. If, let's say, Sriram, you would post the second question in line with what we have discussed so far. Long-term benefits of bridging that gap for security for data democratization. And this is extremely important because we understood from the earlier conversation that we want to make data accessible for all, being inclusive. But it comes with a responsibility, right? So how do you see the long-term benefits of bridging that gap? And I come back, Gautam, to you to ensure we get the right kind of inputs at this stage in this conversation.
It's a tricky one, right? I mean, so I'll give my experience, because I come in one of my previous roles. I used to work in an environment that had to be PCI DSS compliant. It had to be HIPAA high trust. GDPR, you name it. We had to make sure that the right data was being provided to the right kind of people. And so I think in enterprises, there's always that fear of governance that they dangle in front of you and say that, oh, in order to ensure that the data is secure, we need to protect you from the data. And that, I think, is causing a disservice to a lot of people, because if we really dig down to it, and this is what I'm hoping data security is going to drive more towards when we democratize data, is there's a difference between gathering the metrics and just the data points versus the information and the knowledge and the wisdom that people are craving for, the business outcomes, the business KPIs, so to speak. So I think that gap of policy enforcement and governance on one side at a very naive level, to providing the right business KPI is something that I feel we need to start driving towards.
Yes, and I think, Gautam, there is one more great question linked to what you have said. And this is coming from Mafuzer from Alberta, that who owns democratized data?
Yes.
This is a great question.
It is. It is. And so I was actually chuckling when I was answering that, right? I mean, like, is it business or is it IT? Who's going to drive it? I want us all to take a step back and think about what we're talking about. We're talking about democratization. And so democratization is everyone, right? The root of that word comes from making things flat and normalized so that everyone can have the right amount of access. So who's accountable? I believe it's everyone who's accountable. We all need to help it drive democratization of data within the organization. But at the same time, the people who are the current gatekeepers, I believe, should champion it much more to the people who are denied it. We want to have data equity first before we start having data democratization. And I think IT needs to start driving these conversations, having the conversations with security. InfoSec needs to drive it as well, because we need to allow more people, especially the non-technical folks, to have that data literacy so that they know how to use the data rather than becoming that bottleneck and saying, nope, you can't get the data. We will provide whatever you want as long as you submit the questions properly. Right. They don't know the questions.
Yeah, these are great points. And I then come back to Sriram, when we talk about long-term benefits of bridging the gap for security for democratized data, which means essentially that we are making it more accessible. We are building not only on decision-making, but also through the inception stages of planning, how do we use this data? We can build several use cases around it, and making data inclusive in one way or the other. So how would you see, from a technology perspective, what are the key components which we should start looking at? And I know that you have been consulting in the space for a long time. So some thoughts.
Yeah, I would start with the basics. First, I would acknowledge that there is a gap in security, right? Security measures in the way data is being handled in the industry today, right? Be it is democratized or not in the fullest form. But organizations should first ensure that their data that they are maintaining are secure, irrespective of whether how they are holding it. It could be on their own on-premise, or it could be on with the advent of cloud. It could be on a single CSP provider, or it could be multiple, and all those things. But still, where I see a gap that already exists is how the data are being secured. We talk about application security at this point of time in a larger extent. We talk about when we talk about cybersecurity or InfoSec process that organizations follow. One of the things that I always felt is the organizations focus on application and infrastructure and not on data, which is actually one of the key aspects I think the organization should start looking into.
Yeah, great. And we'll come back to this point. I think we in order to move this discussion forward, I would also like to understand what industry research is pointing us to. And this is something which I think, from William, your perspective, it would be great to start this topic from where you sit today. You do a lot of data research projects. How do you think that industry's research is leading us to this point where data democratization becomes a reality, and what are the current challenges?
This is an interesting question, Garima. Thank you. And the democratization of data, when you're thinking of larger scale, especially national or international data, it can be corporate or it can be governmental, open bodies. One of the points was already mentioned, who owns it? A very good question. Data can be bought and sold, obviously. It has to be controlled in some way. Otherwise, it can't be made available for general use. And accessibility is a really good, big topic, a really important point when you're talking about data democratization. Without accessibility and without actual data skills, the data cannot be used to achieve any of the goals, such as making data-informed decisions, which is really what we're moving towards, is actually using the data for positive outcomes. So there are many different aspects. I think we're touching on each one of them slowly. It's hard to do an overall evaluation of this complex topic, but I think it's better if we go point by point through this.
Yeah, sure. And I think this is really good because it paves the way for the next question, which I would ask Ashutosh you, because you have been very active in this space. You work with pharma companies, you work with, leading cloud service provider. So from my perspective, it is also very important that we reflect on shared technology. When we talk about data democratization, how this shared technology and shared responsibility model is steering this data democratization. Can you kind of elaborate and illustrate from your experience some of the use cases you have worked with, and how
Sure.
what kind of direction technology is pointing us to?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point where data democratization allows us to work with multiple organizations. For example, like I've been working in pharma space, and we can only have so much of data to train our models, like machine learning models, to create for drug discovery or for analytics purposes. So it becomes really important that whatever competitors we have in the market, we start coordinating with each other, start sharing the data with each other. What are the analysis of those we share with each other, and then make that data public, so that open source companies or academics or any institutes which are working on improving the technology based on these data can utilize them and make their product more efficient. One of the great examples was the program, which is collaboration between 10 pharma companies based on creating an image analytics pipeline, which will be used to identify the diseases based on machine learning. That would reduce the amount of work which needs to be done manually. It would improve the time which will be taken to for the drugs to reach the market. So all that is possible only because the companies agreed to share their data. It's not going to be like in an unsecure way. They are not going to share their, some kind of proprietary information. But whatever is needed to improve the model is really important. And what we have seen so far is that particular program is really successful in building those pipelines, which are available to everyone. I mean, you can go ahead and download it and run your pipelines through it. So data democratization in healthcare is extremely important. One company cannot go ahead and do everything. So it's very important that they collaborate on a lot of things, and it's happening as we speak. It's happening real time. You can name any company which is in the market, and they are collaborating with every other companies at the moment. So it's very important and a very good thing. And they are, of course, sharing whatever learnings they have in their own organization with each other.
Ashutosh, if you can actually refer to Raminder Rathor's question online in the chat and give her some examples on what you have referred here, that would be great, because this is going on to the white paper as well. I think I come back, Gautam, to you, because I think Ashutosh mentioned several good points, right? And from my perspective, the new level of intelligence, resiliency, and integrity, which has to build through technology in one way, has to happen, and what kind of tools and applications, policies, processes, guidelines are available. If you can throw some light on, what are your reflections, what are those first starting points for any organization to leverage that data capability?
Yeah, definitely. And Ashutosh, really great points. When you were talking about this, I was feeling extremely proud of the fact that a lot of these corporations have gone beyond their focused corporate goals and business goals, and they're actually working towards a higher collective. Especially in the healthcare. The pandemic has driven us to actually collaborate much more closely and help share. And the same thing happens with other biotech firms and with gene sequencing and all these various things, right? I mean, like, there are sectors where we really want to do it. And I want to stress that it's really helping all of us come together, and we are evolving into a data-driven society. And that's an exciting thing for me. Garima, to your question, I think so the basic fundamentals are: how are you going to shelve the data? How are you going to hold it? How are you going to make it flow within the organization? So you have a number of tools there that can help manage the data. Data warehouses is obviously a very simple one. In the olden days, we used to have data lakes. Everyone used to build petabytes and petabytes of data lakes. So that there are a number of organizations that still have those. I want to say that more tools that have low code and no code are really important to democratize the data. And this is something that excites me, especially the push towards low code and no code, because that opens up the door for a lot of things. Data visualization tools, you have BI tools, you have ETL tools, all these various things now allow you to synthesize the data and ask the right questions, and not just take data sets and not know what to do with it. These are the really important ones. But I think in all of these various things, the most underlying tool that I feel is necessary within an organization is trust. We need to trust our people and understand that everyone within the organization is working towards the same corporate goals and the same business outcomes. So it shouldn't be us versus them mentality. I think that is the first tool that we as humans have to do within an organization. And this is something I'm very passionate about. I always talk about trust and humanism, making things more human. And so I think these are some of the very simple tools. The other things are like William mentioned AI. AI is already starting to help with the data democratization. It's fascinating. It's fantastic. So these are some that I would say, at least at the bare minimum, that we need.
Right, and I think if you can reply on the live chat to Mahfuzer's question, what are the common data democratization tools out there for cloud and self-service? That would be great. Maybe you refer to something very, very important, which is trust. Yeah, William, you want to say something?
Yes, I really want to expand on Gautam's idea of the low-code, no-code tools. And I think in combination with data literacy, these two aspects will make a really big jump forward for the data democratization. Data literacy competencies are important. Without the data literacy competencies on a broad scale, and the democratized version of data literacy, meaning not just a few IT specialists have the know-how and can lead you through it and guide you to your data and to your answers, but there's a broader availability of the training, the skill sets to look at data, and the tools supporting them with a simplified user access to enable broader access to the data. And I think this is going to allow business to use the data sets in much more innovative ways, much more ways which are closer to business needs, rather than going through a long IT process to eventually reach their data, and which might be outdated by the time they actually get their results. So speeding it up, the agile aspect of it, and making it more broadly available, really good. And this combination of the tool sets with data literacy are really working together, and that's the way forward.
Right. And James, you want to say something? I think you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I probably always stand up as a black sheep amongst the technocrats. But my view is, it's more of a business architecture that's required. And there are some very interesting points that are picked up in this conversation, because data is becoming such a valuable asset, and you need to have a legal framework to that. You need to have probably something governance around in terms of monetizing it and various other aspects. Now, of course, to some points in terms of the governance, trust is so important from where the source of the data is coming. And in terms of the validity and how long is that data going to be made available? Because we're talking about digital citizens, which are accessing government data, or it could be in terms of corporate or professional network, or even personal. So what are the policies that are governing information, whether it's GDPR, PIPEDA, the rest of the policies that are there from a personal protection point of view, but also in terms of HIPAA, PCI compliance? How does that help us in terms of building up this whole framework or the ecosystem? Because from my perspective, I would like to humanize the data consumption. And as I consume that data, I'm also feeding back into that ecosystem. And how does that get regulated through all these governing bodies that are there? So, so I think, data, though we've been hearing about this for many years, it's still in its infancy. We still have to go to a data pit stop to work on it every moment, whether it's governance, segmentation, classification, so that it becomes valuable for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, and you raised some good points. I have mentioned another question, which is key security frameworks for data democratization. It is not limited to security only, but if you have some views on it, please take an opportunity to write something over there. Ashutosh, you have your hand up as well. If you can, you want to add something here on this low code, no code?
Yeah. Yes. So it was an interesting conversation to hear about low code, no code. But after being working for almost 10 years in this, so what I have learned is right now I'm primarily working on open source. I'm focusing more on open source technologies because I think that reaches out to a mass community and it has a very good community support what is actually needed. But I also have worked on licensed tools, which does give us the option of low code, no code. But the problem with that is they have extremely high license cost, and it's not possible for small organizations or individuals to afford them. So if we're talking about, we don't want to have or we don't want to have any programming, or we want to use no code technologies, I think it's not going to be very easy because they are not available so much readily in the market. And if we are dependent on them too much, I think it would be a lot more difficult for new people to actually get into data. I mean, we have to start using it. There are really good programming, but I think it's something which is on our end that we need to upskill as well, be it any kind of a programming language. I think as time goes by, I think now we are in a stage where programming language itself are getting a bit easier compared to the traditional ones which we had before. So I would not be a total 100% agree that data democratization can only depend on low code, no code, but probably it's going to be a mix of both, the best of both the worlds.
Excellent points, Ashutosh. And I think when we talk about upskilling, I have started talking about meta skills rather than, having a broader conversation of everybody becoming a programmer,
No.
It also kind of, programming is not your survival guide. And I think from my perspective, where I sit in the community, I think that meta skill capability and, having that self-oriented portfolio for meta skills is really something which we should work towards, and that peer-to-peer learning which is coming through these kind of channels like what we are doing together, how many perspectives have opened up. We will go back today and check about all these discussions which we are having. So peer-to-peer learning becomes really important in this context. So again, meta skills and having that individual learning portfolio is something which would be needed in the context of data democratization and awareness, and whatever cross skilling is needed. But that is a conversation I think we should park for this conversation at least, and we get back to some of the good comments which are already kind of being made here. I think one question I had put on the chat was, is there any kind of open source framework for data democratization? And because Ashutosh, you mentioned about open source technologies, I would like to have some kind of a view on what kind of open source tools are available for us to get started.
Yeah, I'm not currently. I'm not working on any tools which is especially for democratization of data, but I did hear about ETLs. I did hear about running some of the advanced technologies. So just few of them was, I think containers is going to be a big thing in the market in the coming days. That's completely open source. The entire community of CNCF is open source. They are the ones who are managing the entire community. Although there are some professional organizations who are building managed services on top of it and providing them as a service, but essentially it's an open source tool with a lot of community support. Then we have ETL, a lot of ETL tools which are drag and drop. They are also open source, or at least they have open source version of them available, on which a lot of startups are building up. If you want to do any individual projects based on data democratization or run an ETL program or anything of that sort, you can still do it. Not on a very large scale, but you can still do it. Then we also have our studio, right? I mean, it's something which all the data scientists usually prefer doing that. They also have their open source version of our studio available. If you're not a very big company, you can still use it without paying any price. Docker is another one which provides you, something like a no code directly by installing their application. So if you are an individual or a very small organization, you can still use their product free of cost. It's only when you start commercializing these things, you have to pay a lot of price. But again, we have to be very sensitive towards what commercialization means. I mean, individually, you can work on simple projects, maybe a startup, but when you are trying to impact a lot of people, you want to get that commercialization aspect into the picture as well. So there are a lot of tools available. You need to have self-learning, as you said. You need to have those skills which you need to develop yourselves, talk to peers, be in such forums like this where they talk about those tools a lot. So I think that's going to be very useful for everyone.
Right, and I've started to hear in background some digital natives, somebody else wants to participate in this conversation as well. But I think I should come back, Gautam, to you, because when I was researching about this topic, I found several usage of how data democratization is building some larger use cases for not only organizations, teams, but also governance. So I found some reference points like there was a pilot done in Prato, Italy for budget management. And this was done through democratized data. There was another experiment in Dublin for capacity building. And there is one use case in Netherlands where they worked with population decline. And these are kind of really huge initiatives which is transforming or disrupting the way we think about these problems. So to the question itself, open security frameworks for democratization of data. Obviously, this is an evolution which is happening as we speak. We are seeing OpenSSF coming in for certain aspects of DevOps and DevSecOps, but data is a new conversation in this context, right? So I would like to have your reflections at this point in time. How do you see that evolution would happen? Do we see a DataSecOps foundation in future, if that is in making, or what is it?
That is a great and complex question. I think so. I'll give my take on it based upon how we have started evolving in this direction, and then afterwards probably open it up to the group to have further discussions. I feel the pandemic has really been that compelling event or that driver to help us to democratize data more. In the past, there used to be these experiments that you mentioned, where there are some small sets of people who have collaborated for a higher purpose or for a cause, and they're trying to share data and using it and trying to secure it to achieve some business objective or some goal, community goal, for example. With the pandemic, things have shifted, right? I mean, we all need to feel secure with the data that has been distributed in multiple places. We need to ensure that we work together, and this is something Ashutosh stressed upon, is the fact that, for example, healthcare organizations are working together. There are other open source projects, I'm pretty sure, that are working on the healthcare aspect of things and trying to drive towards better quality of life for humans, so to speak. And so these kinds of events will drive us. We mentioned CNCF, we mentioned open source DevOps, open source ETL. It is inevitable that DataSecOps is going to emerge as a necessity for managing and not just the security aspect of things, but it's more of reducing the human toil and the friction that is required in getting to those data-driven decision making that is so critical. So I feel we are going in the right direction. I feel that DataSecOps is inevitable for us. And that was also another reason why I posted in the chat, and I really like this panel, and hopefully others who are listening to address it, is I posted a question: what strategies have been successful in convincing IT within your organizations to democratize data? Because we want to know those. We need to repeat these successful patterns in other organizations to help democratize this data. So that's my thought. I'll open it up to the group, but if you can take a few minutes to talk about the strategies that have been successful, or at least pointers on how to start the data democratization conversation in enterprises, that would be great, because our listeners and the white paper can really benefit from some of these strategies.
There are certain things which I would reflect upon, Gautam, here, and this is coming from a white paper we did last year on springboarding data. And there are several things which we discussed in that white paper, but there are two things which I think clearly aligns with your question, that what strategies have been successful in convincing IT and security to democratize data. So the first thing is, without building a shared vision for what is that end goal or the real outcome you're envisioning for, I think it's not possible. Shift left strategy for security, okay, that is a great conversation to have, but shift left strategy for everything what you do. If you want to democratize data, let's shift left. Let's introduce people from the planning and inception stages in this conversation. So when we are making data accessible, we are also not overlooking zero trust architecture. We are not overlooking the in-depth defense policies, like the multi-layer defense and security which is needed. We also are looking at like vulnerability issues which we are having, and all those kind of things are taken care of from a beginning of that conversation. As I think this is extremely essential. One point which was actually reflected in the white paper itself was about licenses. When you exchange data sets, when if you ensure that licensing mechanism or a model where you have the license of ownership and license of use of that data set, and that is exchange on real time, that would be a great thing to have. I haven't seen a tool as such which works on that layer, but this is something which we should start reflecting upon. And now I actually open this conversation to Sriram, and then probably if anyone else has any perspective on this. So Sriram, if you can throw some light on this topic around the key strategies. I know that you have a large background working with consultancy.
One thing which first of all, a few points that we shared over here has been great. What Ashutosh shared, Gautam shared, I think that it's becoming like an eye opener for a lot of people to think of how they can democratize data in their own respective organizations. But back to your question, I think one thing where open security frameworks or the open source frameworks would be adopted is, I think, when we have this blockchain expanding, right? Blockchain technology is a database, right? It's not. It is going to be when it's not just Bitcoin alone, not the digital currencies alone, right? But other sectors as well starts adopting blockchain as a technology in a wide manner. I think there should be a lot of open source frameworks, or specifically we talk about blockchain itself as part of the kind of decentralization, right, which goes well hand in hand with the democratization. So as industries adopts for blockchain, I think there'll be new evolution in the way how data is being democratized. How shift left is one of the strategy that when you said Garima, it may work, but I think it would work only to a certain sectors, right? Or even from the market perspective, I think it would work more from the IT perspective, not much from the business aspects, right? But when blockchain is being adopted, I think all it would be adopted across all layers of an organization, or for any identity that you take.
Right. And I think this is really important that you mentioned about emerging technologies and the interception of emerging technologies, which is happening to enable that data democratization. I think shifting left, of course, in convergence of these technologies is also essential and important when you are building up a wider strategy. I also wanted, William, your perspective on this, because I think you work with this kind of a dimension where you are actually working on democratized data, right? To build some policies to ensure that you curate this data well. So how do you do it in your day-to-day work? I mean, IT and business silos when it comes to democratization of data?
Yeah, this is a big challenge, and we do it in a typical administrative heavy way, I would say, using stewardship of data, using metadata to describe the data, adhering to standards and quality tests. The stewardship is an assigned ownership of data, and everything related with the data will pass through the steward. So this, in order to make data which is potentially confidential available for analysis to businesses or individuals, there has to be some stewardship in order to reduce the risk of this confidential data being exposed to public or even hackers. So this is quite an intense process. It's analyzed and it's verified from security aspects, from data ownership aspects, and it's quite a long process, which for me is a barrier. It's a hurdle to data democratization, because any type of a time delay, the longer it goes, the less valuable the data could be. Some of the data is okay, it's valuable over many years or decades even, but other more actual data, if you're talking about retail sales or something like that, you may be talking about a time frame of days or weeks where this data is useful. So there's a challenge, finding the right balance there is the biggest challenge.
Right. And Ashutosh, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something in this context?
Yes, so I think one of the most important factors and very basic ones is to classify what data we are actually opening up to the world. So for us in pharma, it becomes all more important because there are some data which are just sensitive, there are some data which is confidential, and then there is data which we just cannot share with everyone because it becomes a proprietary organizational data. So classification of that is the first step, I can say. And then the question comes in like, what are the strategies which we use to convince the IT? Well, I think IT and all the supplementary, you can say, are just the enablers for the organization. Business has to take decision, or the owners of the data has to take decision whether they really want to open it up, right? For us, so I'm working in IT, but we cannot take decision that this data looks okay, or this is something which we can open up on our own. There needs to be a collective discussion on this, which needs to happen all the way to the business owners, like what classification this data comes from, or how we can effectively make sure that we are not sharing anything which should not be done. So that's one. And the question about the security becomes tenfold when we think about moving data to cloud, because when the data is on-prem, I think companies can still enforce a lot of restrictions on it. But once it is in cloud, we have to trust whatever the cloud providers are giving us, right? I mean, they say that data is 99.99% durable, available, and then no one can breach it. But we have been seeing all those data leaks happening. I do understand it's also because of the users themselves. But again, it's something which we also have to keep in the back of our mind. And to what Sriram also said, that blockchain technology, I think that's going to be a huge game changer when it becomes more adopted across the industry, because it's based on ledger and it's based on that you cannot cheat your way through it. I mean, data needs to be consistent. It needs to be atomic. You just cannot create multiple copies of it because you want to. So I think those things are still very new. I'm not sure if any healthcare industry or to be fair, any of the other industry other than crypto is actually using it very, very well. But I think its uses are really going to be very interesting in the future, with a lot of cloud services provider offering them as a database to store your data as well. So yeah, interesting times ahead in this technology as well.
Very good points, Ashutosh. And I think there is a question from Mahfuzar on the chat where you can outline your comments for governance of data in that direction. Should an organization enable governance council in their data democratization journey? This is a great question as well, because what we see is when we started some technology convergence movements within large enterprises where I sit, I think we constantly struggle with this topic because we don't have that kind of maturity, in order to ensure we bring the right kind of tools, technologies, processes, and also set this right expectation for experimentation. So yeah, I think we are getting to the last leg of this conversation. It has been a great conversation so far. I have the last question which I had put up. Obviously, I see more questions coming in. So you're all welcome. We have 10 minutes. But what is your North Star regarding securing the democratization of data? And that's something which will be a key takeaway from our white paper perspective. So I would like to have more perspective on that question as well. I see some comments from James, humanizing access to trusted data, enabling consumer of data to be contributors to in a regulated manner. Great comment, James.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we're all going to be stewards of data in terms of how we contribute, and it's relevant in terms of it's segmented and classified and made available to people as and when it's required. Yeah.
Right. And now it's time if you have any comments, Omba or Munaf, if you want to add anything to this conversation, please do. Okay, I see some more comments in the sections around tools and how democratization of data.
I know we don't have time to talk about it, but
Yeah.
coming from an enterprise and having led a number of data teams in the past, this is something that is really critical. I just want to throw it out there. I made a comment, but we talk about democratizing the data and providing access and all this. A lot of legacy companies and organizations having organically grown, their data inventory itself is probably lacking, and they don't know what data sources are available, which causes a bigger problem. So I just want to throw it out there. I actually commented it on the group saying that that is another, the struggle is real for companies who need to do a proper data inventory of all the data sources that they have.
Right, and this is really good because I think we have some room here for 5 minutes to discuss about the roles. You know, when you talk about legacy data and data ownership, it is important to understand that the why this problem has occurred from the past. There's a lot of data sitting where there is no valuation done on that data. Is it an asset or a liability? And I think people are getting serious about building that connection with the CDOs, like the chief data officers and CFOs. That what is that valuation we are sitting on? If it is an asset, we should utilize that, and if it is a liability, we should actually secure and get rid of as much as possible. So I think if you have any perspective, any of you, around what roles would be required in terms of data governance, that is a great ending point to this whole conversation.
Probably I'll start first, Gaimap. I think you've gotten a right point, right? One word which goes hand in hand with data is data monetization, right? So data is going to be an asset for any industry or for any organization, right? Anything that they are not able to monetize will go as a waste, right? I think, but it is going to be, I mean, the data wastage is going to be less. You don't know as an organization, right? I think that is why data democratization will also help in for for the business. You don't know when you can monetize the data at the right time, right? As a from the business perspective. So when you have a proper data democratization structure, that would help you to monetize right data at the right time, right? So I think that is how industry would turn into.
Right. And William, if you see anything happening from your day-to-day context, do you see any kind of data stewardship, any kind of data ownership, taking precedence, and there are roles in the organization people are getting serious about?
Yes. The data stewardship, I think, as I just posted, actually, I think at the least, the minimum, it's a good business idea. And in certain situations, it could be business critical, it could be legally binding. So an analysis of data stewardship in your particular situation with your particular data is a must.
Right. And I think what I reflected upon earlier, the valuation of that data, that financial tie up of that asset is extremely important. And I'm seeing from the community perspective, this conversation is starting. People are actually having a governance around the chief data officers and the chief financial officers to tag and evaluate that data. And more or less, I think we will see a new structure of data analysts, data officers, data ops engineers, data architects. Obviously, there are multiple, different roles which we see coming up, and this is an evolving area. Even the organization or operating model will evolve as we speak around these kind of topics. So this is great. I think we will write a snippet around data, the roles and the operating model around data democratization. If you have any offline thoughts on it, pass on to me. I think we are running short in time. We have 5 minutes left. So I think I'll give an opportunity to everybody to kind of close this conversation, starting from, I think, Ashutosh, I see you at the first, window on my screen. So what is your North Star with data democratization?
Well, yeah, I'll come to that, but I'd also like to add one more role, which you just mentioned with data officers. I think Chief Information Security Officer role is also becoming very important, and more organizations are looking at it at a very high level as well, because we need to govern it from a very from an executive level itself, and not just from you can say operational level. So, and talking about my North Star, I think we are handling data in a more collective way. It's as someone has also mentioned before, that it's a collective responsibility. It's not an individual's responsibility to make sure that data is available to everyone. It's available securely to everyone. So I think we work in a very organized manner. We work in a team, and that's a very good way to do that, because we have enough people to guide us if indeed we would go take a wrong step, or maybe to motivate us as well in the journey.
That's great. So James, over to you. I'll just have some closing comments from you.
So I think, like I said earlier, I think the business architect is relevant in terms of putting up this whole plan, because it's, of course, about technology, but it's also about consumption of the data and bringing relevance in terms of how secure that data is. And when we build up an ecosystem, because the consumers are also going to be providers of data, when you build up that ecosystem, that platform is so relevant. And that's where the business architect would assist in the whole build up of the data and its relevance from a secure point of view.
Great. Can you add this point to the chat? That would be great. William?
Well, if we ask ourselves why companies are so concerned about data democratization, it's a serious investment. We're looking at educating your employees. We're looking at implementing tool sets and supporting them. We're looking at managing change, and these are not trivial undertakings by any means. So it's about solving challenges, things like I don't have access to the data I need, or I can't trust the data. I see the data, but I cannot analyze it. I don't have the skills or the tools, and other experts are too busy to help me. These are typical things we hear relatively often, and democratization is addressing all of these. So there are multiple challenges, and I think we've done a great job looking at these and suggesting ways forward. And you're on mute.
Omba, at this point in time, any closing remarks from your side?
Okay, I think all the other speakers have basically said everything. I just want to add that in democratizing data, everyone should be mindful of the information they put out there. Everyone should take responsibility and have security at the forefront of their minds. Thank you.
Great points. Sriram?
I think we summed up pretty much, Gaima. But one point, if I can add, right? We spoke about the different roles, right? And with some of the problems that we spoke today, I think teams should get into having a dedicated data designers, right? How to receive the data that comes in, how to probably manage it, the data inventory problem which Gautam highlighted, right? So it also depends on probably getting into in a very structured way, right? So my guess would be, the data designers as wholes would something that would evolve, which would help organizations in, in managing the data.
Right. Munaf, do you want to add something to this conversation?
Yeah, I just want to basically put in what William has said. I think he touched the most important aspect because I come from the business side. So I really echo what William said about the challenges that as a business user you may be having. What I would like to add further is the investment is so high at this point of time that large enterprises probably may have the facility or the deep pockets to invest in that. But how do we bring it to the small and medium sectors, which are basically a fuel to the larger enterprises? So how do you bridge or bring those? Because data is available. How to utilize the data is where people are struggling with today. So they may not have the liberty of utilizing everything. So how do we get into that situation?
Excellent points, excellent points. And I think you are a great addition to this team, because this is the kind of conversation we would like to have. That is why we want to democratize data. Just because somebody has a big pipe of data doesn't create that kind of unfair advantage. So really good points. Gautam, I would like to close this conversation today with final remarks from you. And hopefully we will see the white paper very, very soon. Yeah. Over to you. Good.
Please edit this out because I'm just going off script. But when Munal said data pipe, data inventory. Okay, there we go again. Cataloging your data, all your data sources, your data inventory is really important. I think data literacy, understanding what the data is, how to use it, how to secure it is really important. Making it accessible to people. Easy data visualization is another one, and then cultivating trust. So understanding why someone is asking for access to the data, what questions are they trying to answer, or what business outcome they're trying to meet is critical for data democratization in my mind.
Really good points. And with this, we come to the end of this conversation. I have my partner in crime, Ashutosh, who would be writing the white paper with me. So I am looking forward for this great collaboration. Obviously, I would like to thank all of you for today's discussion. Really, really good points. And with that, I also want to invite you for the Data Ops Summit, which happens in Canada, 28th of June. Please block your calendars. Please reshare this great summit, which is happening from a crowdsourcing perspective. We want to collaborate on these kind of topics there. So your support is very, very critical to us. So thank you very much for your presence today. And we sign off. Thank you. Thank you for a great conversation. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.